car boot sale is not the usual place to unearth an historic piece of art, but that's where the only known painting of Mary Seacole by London artist Albert Challen was found.
In 1805, Mary Seacole was born in Kingston, Jamaica to a Scottish soldier father and mixed-race mother. Her mother had run a boarding house for invalid soldiers, and it was from her she learned nursing skills and the principles of herbal medicine. In 1854, Seacole sailed to England and volunteered herself to those recruiting for Florence Nightingale's nursing contingent. She was refused, most likely because of her ethnicity. Undeterred, Seacole travelled to the Crimea at her own expense. She was widely known to the troops throughout the Crimea as Mother Seacole, and soon became a familiar figure on the battlefield, taking food, drink and her nursing skills to the wounded and dying. Seacole remained in the Crimea until 1856, returning to England impoverished. The sudden end of hostilities had left her bankrupt. Although Seacole's exploits were detailed in the media, there are only a few known images of her and one portrait that has only recently come to light.
I think we were both astonished and rather surprised. Astonished in the sense that we had no expectation that a painted portrait of Mary Seacole was about to emerge. I mean, you don't get told these things in advance, that's the point of a surprise.
I remember clearly the day I wrapped it all carefully in loads and loads and loads of bubble wrap inside a very strong briefcase and went to the National Portrait Gallery and sat in this room with several people, including Paul Kerr, with whom I worked on the Channel 4 documentary, and opening the case and very ceremoniously unwrapping the bubble wrap and producing the painting. And I could see the gleam in their eye, but they were very kind of clever about not being too excited about it.
We were very pleased at the National Portrait Gallery that it was possible to have this portrait on loan, and the fact that Helen Rappaport not only discovered it, but then was good enough to bring it to us to work on it, so to speak, authenticate it, think about it with her was the first stage, and as I say, we were thrilled to have the chance to have it on loan. That could have been fine for many years, but one always knows with a national collection that you've got to think to the long term. So in thinking about that, we regarded it, and our trustees regarded it, as ultimately really important that we should be able to acquire it for the nation, and therefore make sure that it was here and could be made available as widely as possible, could be put into other exhibitions, put on display, made available for tour, all kinds of things that become possible once it's owned by the National Portrait Gallery itself. And yes, it's true, at the back of our mind there was that thought that if we weren't able to acquire it, it might go overseas or it might be in a private collection and therefore not be available at all.
In the same year Helen discovered the portrait, Seacole was once again in the public eye, having been voted the greatest black Briton. 2 years after this, the portrait was taken off indefinite loan as it entered the National Portrait Gallery's collection. The Mary Seacole Statue Appeal was established to commemorate the memory of her work, as well as addressing Seacole's absence from London's Crimean War Memorial. The appeal also organised a plaque to recognise her last surviving place of residence. The portrait also holds another significance.
There are other portraits of black women within the Portrait Gallery's collection. I think it's probably the case that this is the only woman on her own, but I think much more importantly, it's the only woman of the status in terms of being recognised as someone who's achieved great things. And of course, you know, the image you see is of Mary Seacole with her medals. I mean, I think part of what's so fascinating is that it's a very proud image. I mean, she's clearly looking appropriately very proud as she's sort of in a sense on display in that portrait. So it's several things at once in terms of a changing iconography within British history, and certainly within the iconography of representation of black people in this country.
There is no portrait of a black woman in her own right, not as a loyal colonial subject kneeling at Queen Victoria's feet, or as a slave or a servant in the background. There are plenty of representations of black people like that, but always in the background with pictures of white people. So that's the only image I have ever encountered of a black woman from the mid-19th century painted in her own right.
But I think I'd take the larger view that if you're really thinking across 19th century history as a tool, and you're looking at great pioneers of one kind or another, Mary Seacole's amongst them. There's often a comparison made with Florence Nightingale, and one can discuss that in more particular ways. But the fact is that whatever Florence Nightingale did, Mary Seacole did some extraordinary things herself in terms of the care of those in the Crimea, and also about thinking of different ways in which she could really make a difference in the midst of the most appallingly complex conflict. So she's an extraordinary person and has an extraordinary life.